I guess Gurindji for country has always been there since colonisation. It just has a name now. It has an organisation. But we've always been organised and we've always been fighting. We don't fight for our future generations to know our names, but we fight so that they know that we love them, and they know because we've left the world in a better place.
Mutual, mutual, ba-la-la, mutual, mutual, ba-la-la. This is the Mutual Broadcasting System.
Residents across Victoria and South Australia are being urged to remain vigilant as extreme fire conditions threaten both states.
Downgraded and lost cyclone status, 100-kilometre-an-hour winds have torn roofs off homes and intense rainfall has swamped the region.
These are tough times, but Australians are tough people.
Hello friends, this is the Radio Reversal podcast, and we are recording this on the unceded lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge their continuing sovereignty, continuing connection to country, and ongoing struggle for justice in this place. On this episode of the Radio Reversal podcast, we are again continuing our series on disasters, on crisis, and on collective futures. We've been really digging into, thinking about disasters, crisis, their relationship to colonialism, to capitalism, the state, and also how in moments of disasters, in moments when crises become extremely acute and immediate in our lives, this can open up spaces of rupture, in which we can get a glimpse of ways of being and living together otherwise. One of the things we've talked a fair bit about on Radio Reversal, not only in this series, but I think over the course of our 4ZZZ broadcast show over the years, is that crises, what we call a crisis or crises and disasters, they're not evenly distributed. Some people are far more frequently faced with disaster conditions, often as a result of state violence and neglect, capitalist exploitation and extraction, ableist heteropatriarchy, cis-sexism, and the externalities that kind of result from these structures and activities. And of course, as always, particularly thinking about where we are, because of the ongoing violence of colonial dispossession as something that absolutely and materially structures the distribution of crisis conditions and disasters. And what this kind of reframing or rethinking of the nature of crises and disasters does is helps us, particularly those of us who are settlers, notice the uneven distribution of disasters and crises and what they tell us about the material realities of colonialism and capitalism, and what that asks from us, of us, as people who are interested in solidarity and in transformation. And it attunes us to the fact that there are people out there already doing this work, who have been doing the work of fighting for kin and country, for justice, for futures against the forces of colonialism and capitalism for literally hundreds of years. This is part of what we mean when we talk about grounding our thinking and activism in the material fact of Aboriginal sovereignty. The sovereignty is sometimes expressed through struggle, and we ought not act as though we're discovering a new front when others have been doing that work for ages. And in fact, there are opportunities to learn from and with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and other First Nations people who've been doing this work, who've been in this fight longer than we have, and who are well practiced at sustaining themselves and their communities in and through struggle. And so we could not be more delighted than to be bringing you this conversation with Rikki Dank, Gurindji and Waikaya woman and one of the directors of Gurindji for Country. I'm going to read a little blurb about Gurindji for Country here, just a little quote so you understand a little bit more about the organisation. The Gurindji for Country Aboriginal Corporation is a grassroots First Nation organisation formed in 2021 with the aim of consolidating the work that our family has been doing over many decades. We aim not only to protect our country from the destruction created through extractive industry, but also to protect our rights to speak for our country and to preserve our culture and our civilization. Importantly, we are seeking to empower our community to be able to continue to live sustainably on country, and for our women to be able to continue to perform the important leadership and cultural roles that they have held forever. The Karanjini Rumbaria, which is part of the Gurindji Nation, Gidangji Nation in speaking for and caring for our country. As a grassroots First Nations organisation, we are fighting to protect our country from the damaging effects of overgrazing, mining and now fracking, a continuing legacy of ongoing settler colonialism. As custodians of our country, we have an enduring responsibility to protect and care for it, as well as all our human and non-human kin. In fighting to protect our country, we also aim to elevate the voices of other First Nations and their own struggles. In doing so, we hope to better inform the wider public about the need to protect country and how they can join us in this fight, and how we will all benefit from working together to protect our country and environment. We seek a sustainable future where we can continue to practice and share our culture and Indigenous knowledge systems with the wider community as we walk together. So that's a bit about Gidangji for Country. And this interview with Rikki Dank, one of the co-directors, covers a wide range of topics, topics we've been orbiting around for a while in relation to the slow violence, a concept Rikki draws on in this interview, of environmental degradation and colonialism, the links between climate change and colonial capitalism, the history of damaging extractive practices on Gidangji country across the Beetaloo and elsewhere, and from the damage wrought by early colonising pastoralists through to contemporary fracking, and how Aboriginal people have fought and found ways to care for country in defiance of the colonial capitalist apparatus. We see the long emergency of colonialism and of climate change not as something expressed only through short and sudden big events like Cyclone Alfred that kind of initiated this series, but also through creeping pollution, contamination, and degradation. In learning to pay attention to these different temporal expressions of disaster and crisis, we can better learn how to organise ourselves and our struggle as climate change escalates. This isn't a new fight, so we can learn from those in it for longer. We also, in this interview with Rikki, talk about Indigenous futurity and possibility, of what it means to heal country, and the importance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders being able to stay on country and care for it in accordance with their knowledge and with the futures they seek. For their sake, because it's just and right, but actually also for all of our sakes. And in the latter part of this interview with Rikki Dank, she draws our attention to some of these ways we can tune in and show up for each other amid and through pain. Subtle and tender ways, staunch, refusing, disruptive ways. So enjoy.
I am so excited for today's conversation with an activist and community organiser I've admired for a long time. Rikki, for listeners who haven't come across your work before, can you start by introducing yourself and your country and where you speak from?
Yes, so my name's Rikki Dank. My bush name is Lariprina, and I'm a Gidangji and Wakaya person. My skin group is Rumburia. My clan is Rumburia. My skin group is Noralima. I'm from I'm from a lot of people know it's the Barkly Tablelands, but now I think more now Beetaloo, and it's about 9 hours east of Darwin, so it's a long way away from major cities, and I'm from water and spring country and hill country, so really beautiful open woodland, grassland, water everywhere, really beautiful country. So that's where I'm from.
Thank you so much. Thank you for telling us a bit about where you're from, Rikki. And I guess you've kind of started to sketch this out already, but for folks who aren't as familiar with Gidangji country, can you tell us a little bit more about, I guess, this part of the world? And you alluded already to the fact that some people might be more familiar now with the term the Beetaloo Basin or these kind of reference points for the area. But tell us a bit about this part of the world and I guess how people might have heard about it, your country already.
It's funny because I sometimes I think about country through different stages of, through the years of Australia and Australia being colonised. So I guess, back when my grandfather was a young person, it was the beef backbone, of Australia, where there was a lot of pastoralists and cattle, running cattle was the, where a lot of people got employment from or not being employed. As my grandfather wasn't employed, it was forced labour, and he was born into forced labour. So that was, for a many few years that was happening. And but now more recently, I guess we've got McArthur River Mine, about half an hour away from where my traditional country is. We've also got another mine, Merlin Mine. I think it's now currently closed, so it's a diamond mine. And now we have fracking. So we are, rich in many ways, whether it's from pastoralists or, mining. And it's like every kind of every kind of mineral you can think of, iron ore. I think it's copper, definitely zinc, and diamonds. And if you look hard enough, I bet you there's probably gold there as well. But for me and for us, it's home. It's where Gurindji people come from, where we are born. It's where three mermaids, or it's Marabana country, women's country. So where three mermaids have come in from the sea, they sat down at this place called Gurindji, and they were sad for the ocean. And they were so sad that they called up the ocean, and the ocean came up over the country and made water, therefore giving life to country, to us. So that's, for us, how life began, is through these three women.
One of we're kind of thinking a lot on this particular series of our radio show, I guess, about disaster, weather events, these kind of moments of environmental crisis and the sort of politics that emerge in those times. And so part of the reason, the Gurindji country is so, there's such a powerful legacy of resistance among Gurindji people, that you are part of and speaking for today. And there's also such a strong and violent history of ecological crisis. And I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit. Some of our listeners might remember some of the news stories from a couple of years ago, kind of around 2018, 2019, after routine testing of the water supply in the township of Garawa revealed really elevated levels of lead and manganese, I believe, which prompted pretty serious concerns, health concerns for residents, as well as concerns for the flow-on ecological effects of those high levels, which led to really major community protests, particularly against the mining company Glencore, who you mentioned earlier, whose McArthur River mine is just upriver. Can you tell us a little bit more about this sort of particular set of disasters, I guess, and the kind of water crisis in Garawa and Burralula, the nearby community, and I guess how the community responded?
Yeah. So to be, really open and honest about the situation. So I wasn't there, and it's been a few years since I've actually lived in Burralula, and so having gone through or seeing, family go through some of those things, I cannot speak on, personally on how that affects me, but I know that it affects my family. And I guess that's why we do what we're doing at the moment. But so for that instance, right, that one instance wasn't a one-off. The community has always been aware of, these water being contaminated by, heavy metals, right, since day one. So, since it being switching to open cut, we have been very aware of all of these changes, so much so that we don't fish in particular places at certain times of the year. We know that sometimes tailings dams will be breached, and so we aren't really sure what we should do about in those situations, right? But even at the moment now, when it's not contaminating water, there are times where there is the rubbish dump from that mine catches on fire, and you see these plumes of smoke. It heads over towards and falls over Burralula. And so, for us, as a person who has lived in this community and who has family from this community, because actually Borroloola is a place where when non-Indigenous peoples first came there, we were herded off our countries and put into Borroloola. So that's how and why Borroloola was made. So now we have all of these, different nations, different clan groups living together, and then you've, removed them from their country, and now they're having to deal with these crises of, worrying about the polluted water. When it's times of flooding, when it's happening now more often, when there are times where the community is absolutely cut off. I remember once when I was there, it was for 3 months, right? And we didn't have any food or water, just about. We had to boil water to make sure that we could drink it. So this kind of stuff happens regularly in terms of disasters, and us having to be really careful about water and water contamination. It's almost now part of the norm in Borroloola. And I guess it's sad, but Borroloola and people or towns like Borroloola are really, really good at picking themselves up, and dusting themselves off again, without, huge help from, territory government or federal governments. They've had to do that. Communities have to do that time and time again. And it's not just Borroloola, it's a lot of remote Aboriginal communities. So that instance, though, having the water being contaminated it's not a one-off, and I believe that it's still happening. It's just that the levels fluctuate from year to year, depending on what time of year it is. But yeah, I hope that answers the question. Is that we've learned to live. And also, because we're so close to Mount Isa, Mount Isa has a very similar situation where there's signs up saying, living with lead. This is how you live with lead in your water. Don't wash your car with water because there's so much lead and it's going to corrode the paint. This, and this. I was born in Mount Isa. My mum was born in Mount Isa. So because of how, the relationship closely with removal and kinship and whatnot, people in the territory, particularly around Borroloola and Camberwell, we've got close relationships, right? So that's how we know about lead in water. It's because of our relationships with people in Mount Isa, or, Kalkadoon people. So it's very normal for us, unfortunately, to know about all of this and to be living with it.
Yeah, and I think it's such a crucial reminder that these moments where, for a brief period of time, there's maybe some mainstream media coverage of, elevated levels of contamination, but that it's not an isolated event. And I think that's such a crucial part of the conversation we're kind of trying to have about these sort of weather events or so-called natural disasters more broadly is what gets erased when we focus on them as though they're like individual isolated events. Obviously, Gurindji country has been shaped by, centuries of Gurindji people's resistance to colonial occupation, and particularly these sort of different forms of extraction and exploitation, from overgrazing and, damaging farming practices through to the extractive mining projects that you were starting to talk about, and then more recently to coal seam gas projects. But for listeners down here who maybe just don't know much about this yet, or, haven't thought heaps about the ecological impact of those kind of practices, what are the sort of impacts that kind of extractive and exploitative mining, farming, coal seam gas, what impact does that have on waterways and country? It's
amazing how little we know about fracking in Australia, right? When They've done it for so long in the US, and they've done studies, and there's so much documentation, right, on fracking in the US, so much so that I don't understand why the government will insist on allowing it to happen. It's really scary stuff. So I look at fracking like this, right? So you have the immediate and local effects, and then you have your regional, and then your national, and then your international effects, right? So if you're looking at local effects, so people who are living around and near a fracking well or fracking wells, they're at risk of developing cancers, developing respiratory illnesses, long-term respiratory illnesses like asthma, COPD. I'm also a registered nurse, so I'm really comfortable with using this kind of medical jargon and understanding it. So, and then also when you are looking at the water then that they're going to poison, the chemicals that are used in that also cause cancer. They can cause and help people develop end-stage renal disease, liver disease, also skin cancers, because people end up drinking this water, right? So 90% of territory or Territorians drink bore water, right? And this is the water that my family will be drinking. And a lot of this water that comes up from the Beetaloo also comes up to the surface because of how our country is, because it's spring country, right? And it's lime. So the other impacts that I believe that the government hasn't taken into consideration is when they're fracking, they force vast amounts of water, sand, and these toxic chemicals down a shaft and cause an explosion, right, to fracture the water, the soil, rock underneath to release the gas, right? Our country has a lot of lime, and it's very fragile. So our worry is that this will cause leaks, gas leaks that will come up to the surface. Now, what do we need to do every year? We need to burn off every year to minimise the risk of big bushfires. Now, if we don't do that, and because I've lived for a long time out on country, good half of my life I've lived out bush. When we had our country first handed back to us from pastoralists, they didn't burn off. And the year that we moved out, we had a huge bushfire where we were surrounded on all sides from a bushfire. And I was, I think, about 13, 14, and I was petrified. I was so scared. We had flames as tall as double-story houses surrounding us, and we were on the road, and we saw these flames, leaping across the road, and then trees exploding. Now, if we aren't able to burn off and we have a big bushfire and there's gas leaking, what is that going to cause? Of course, we don't know. Huge explosions. There are places in Azerbaijan where gas leaks up into the surface, where they're still burning today for hundreds of years. These holes, these pits are burning. So this is what can happen locally, right? And also, particularly for people in Borroloola, we escape drinking the poison water from the mine. We go out bush, we go to our country. But of course, if we don't have access to our country anymore, because it will be all sold off or leased off to these gas companies and fracked, we'll be drinking poisoned water anyway. So this, of course, will have an impact of us not being able to continue to have access to country, to care for country, to burn off, to follow our song lines, to accurately care for country. And then, of course, we'll be drinking poisoned water. So the Beetaloo Basin, a lot of people, I think, don't realise also, is the size, roughly the size of Belgium, right? So if you can imagine all of these people drinking this poisoned water, this is the land mass that is going to be poisoned, right? And then on top of that, you have our non-human kin, right, drinking and this poisoned water. So this is a problem. We have quolls, we have Gouldian finches, we have a whole lot of non-human kin that are becoming extinct. So this is the local problem, right? The regional problem. We've seen in recent news, that on Empire, and that's on my country, that's fracking our country. There's been toxic water that has been leaked and it has killed. You can see where it's gone, because it has killed the trees, the grass, on my country, on my home, right? And that's just water, I think, I believe, from the well. So in terms of regional, and we're talking about Beetaloo Basin and the water in the basin being poisoned, we, as Indigenous peoples from the Beetaloo Basin, we believe that all of these underground waterways are connected, right? And so there is a risk then of that water then further along being contaminated. And we don't know the ongoing effects of that. So, and I believe, so if we move on to the global stage and think about how this affects people globally, right? Scientists now believe, I think there was an article done back in August 12th last year, or maybe the previous years. It's amazing how the years kind of blend in together now, hey, as you get older. And I think it was done by ABC. And they believe now, I think it's 150%, so carbon emissions from the Beetaloo Basin. So if they open up the Beetaloo Basin for fracking, the carbon emissions from that will be now increased to 150% Australia's carbon emissions. And that's just the Beetaloo, right? And I think Santos is looking at, I think, over 8,000 wells. And that's just Santos, right? We're not talking about Empire. We're not talking about Tamboran. It's really devastating. It's devastating to think that the government is so willing to sacrifice Indigenous, it's not just Indigenous people's lives, right? But it's people's lives for the sake of, for what? Because, if you think about it, they're not even taxing these people. They're not even getting royalties, from these companies. So what is it for? Why are we being exposed and to this slow violence? Because it is slow violence that we are experiencing here. Because if you think about it, they are minimizing our access to country. They are poisoning our water. They are stopping us from being able to eat our traditional foods. So I absolutely do see this as a form of genocide, a slow genocide. For what? I don't know, because they're not even making money out of it.
Rikki, thank you. I feel like it's so crucial to have spaces to talk about the gravity of this stuff, and I think that reminder that this is a genocidal project and that there isn't really another word for a kind of a dynamic that seeks to disappear people from their country and then destroy their waterways and country and ability to live there. It's, yeah. And I think this is something that I guess I want to sit with the gravity of that and invite people to sit with the gravity of that. But I also want to, I guess, honour and amplify the fact that Gurindji people have been actively resisting and refusing to be disappeared from their homelands from the beginning of invasion and right through to now. And so I wondered if this might be a time to start talking, I guess, about G'danyji for Country, which is one of the organisations that you're connected to, and which kind of comes out of this furnace of, intersecting genocidal projects of the state and capitalism to demand and work towards futures for G'danyji people on G'danyji country. Can you tell us a little bit about how the organisation came about and I guess what you're doing?
So, I mean, since I was born, I think I've been, without knowing, my grandmothers and my mum and dad, but my grandmothers and my grandmothers, everybody, the community, right? And that saying where if a child doesn't feel the warmth of its community, the child will grow up and eventually burn the community down. I believe that's true, and it's the opposite that's happened for me. I'm a result of a child that has been absolutely loved and loved on, by my community. So here I am, and this is what Aboriginal communities do when they are allowed to love their children how they should be loved, right? I am a result of that. We fight back for our communities. So when I was a very, very little girl, my grandfather one of the things he would say to me is, because they called me Tika, because my name is Rikki Dank, and my cousin couldn't say my name, so it got cut down to Teek or Tika. And he'd say, Tika or Teek, where is your gujiga? Where is your soul? And for a long time he would say that when I was very little. And my soul, wherever I am in the world, is always with my country. It's not with me. It is sitting there at Little River, where I'm from. So we've, ever since I was a little girl, we have always been moulded to be critical thinking of yourself, but in a fair way. So it has led us to be very independent in terms of, we're independent and we're very critical thinkers, G'danyji people, right? So I guess when we had our land handed back to us back with two different stages, one native title block 92 and the other in 1999, we moved out bush and we moved out onto our country with the goal of that's it, we're going to set up our country and we're going to live out here and we're going to live like how our old people wanted us to live, and that's still the goal. And then we realised that it's really difficult to do that because the government doesn't want us to do that. And it made it really hard for us to live out there. We saw the damage that the pastoralists had done to our country. And, my family is currently living out there now and trying to, care for country and have it recovered and recover it to, its former self. But now I think it was back in 2017 when we first heard about empire and fracking. And because we knew about fracking around us, but because it wasn't on our country, yes, we could support those people who were fighting, but it wasn't really our place to take a stand in terms of, to take the spotlight from that. Of course, we amplify and help, but until it was on our country is where we had to make a decision, I guess, is where we had to, okay, now we have to stand up and now we have to fight. So I can remember the day. I actually moved over to Dubai to start up an Aboriginal art gallery, and my goal was to go back home, buy art from Borroloola and to bring it back here and sell it here. So I got a phone call and I was just about to get into the shower. My uncle called me and he said, Bub, they're going to start fracking our country. And there was like a bit of a pause and a bit of some silence on the phone. And I said, okay, Mimi, we will get organised and we will start. So that was the day that I decided to shut down my art gallery here. And that was the day that we started to get organised and we started up Gurindji for Country. And we had to get serious because, this was a big fight and we knew how big it was going to get and we had to get serious about fighting it. So that was probably the day that the concept of Gurindji for Country was born. I think it's 3 years old now. I don't really sit back and think about the years or how long we've been doing this, but realistically, I think we've been doing this since colonisation, and we've been doing it in different forms. Just quickly, my great-grandmother's father, when non-Indigenous folk first turned up to our country, they were out to kill my immediate family. And so he made the decision to split up the family and send people away. His eldest daughter, my great-grandmother, was the firstborn. He put her and placed her in the nation next door to us and in the Wakaya nation, and they kept us alive. And so that it too is a way of fighting back, is being kept alive, right, and living. I guess Gurindji for Country has always been there since colonisation. It just has a name now. It has an organisation. But we've always been organised and we've always been fighting.
It's so inspiring, and it's just, it just feels like exactly what we've been trying to think about over the last few months, particularly as we're trying to confront, this sort of the polycrisis, the fact that things are getting worse. The climate crisis, the impacts of the climate crisis are worsening across the globe, and people are being impacted in more and more severe ways. But that there are these like rich, deep wells of knowledge from people who've been fighting, the death-making machines of colonization from the very beginning. And I think I'm so grateful, to have had the time to hear you talk about this and these kind of big legacies of struggling against colonial capitalism and all of the ways it has tried to dismantle Gurindji life worlds and failed, and how vital that part of the story is. One of the things that's so striking about the work that you're doing now with Gurindji for Country, and that I think you've kind of started to explain why this is already, but is that the kind of the project spans really broad terrain. So you're focused not just on climate justice work, but on women's rights, on Indigenous land rights and self-determination struggles, on water security, on climate justice, on economic justice, social justice. And you talk a bit in the work that I've seen you publish as Gurindji for Country around like trying to focus on building solutions that address all of these kind of interconnected challenges that work to liberate everyone all at once. Can you talk a bit more, I guess, about what that looks like in the context of Gurindji Country and why that's such a vital part of the work you do?
Yeah. So our approach to it, because that's the thing too, right? It's everything is circular, right? We can't box things up into one thing, and I think that's just how Gurindji people operate and how we think. We think in these big circular, things where everything is overlapped, right? Because it's all interconnected. So we have different arms and different in our organizations where we'll have like a political engagement arm. We've got community engagement. We've got all these different ways where we engage, whether it's international, regional, or local, right? Our community. So in part of that, though, one of our projects that we would love to launch soon and that we're working on is like a ranger program that works alongside of microstation, right? Where we look after country, right? We monitor country and we monitor the impacts that has happened, and we are aiming for pre-colonial restoration of country. So while and after we've done that, we are then looking at introducing cattle, because we know cattle, right? My family have have raised cattle since colonization. One of my cousins, she's actually ranked bull rider, right? She knows how to run a cattle station with her eyes closed and, you know, all arms, legs tied behind her back. That's how amazing she is, right? So my family know how to do this. And so our concept was, right, okay, how can we don't believe in reinventing the wheel. How can we make the wheel better? So how can we implement our knowledge-based systems with this new system? Because, you know, we think that the cattle industry is not going to go away anytime soon. And it's something that we need to learn how to live with. And so how we incorporate our caring for country techniques with raising cattle. So microstation idea where we have a certain amount of head of cattle that, you know, these outstations can have and raise. And then that then creates a lifestyle which allows Indigenous peoples to live out on country, follow their songlines and law, and then also be, you know, economically independent of having to, instead of going to work for the mine, they have their own small business, which allows for them to be independent, to economic freedom, and, you know, the flow-on effects then for the community, the broader community, I think would just be amazing. So that's one of our ideas that we have to keep people out on country and keep country healthy.
Yeah, and it's making me think about this actually incredible history of Aboriginal and to some extent Torres Strait Islander communities across the continent who have, you know, found ways to use, I guess, pastoral employment as a way to stay on country and hold on to, you know, cultural traditions and refuse to be moved by the colonial project, which is such I think an important part that is often like missed in the sort of settler colonial mythology of the bush or, you know, the kind of big pastoral stations. This is such a big part of Gurindji for country, it seems to me, is this sort of steadfast refusal to be dispossessed from your lands again. And to refuse to be moved, you know, even when the conditions, even when the colony is making life on Gurindji country as difficult as possible, you're actively trying to imagine an intergenerational future for Gurindji people on country. I guess for people who haven't like thought much about the history of colonization or why that might be so vital or such a vital part of the work you're doing, can you just talk a little bit more about that and why you will not be moved?
You know, and I don't think it's just Gurindji theory or philosophy, right? I think Indigenous Australia is, you know, a philosophy, I think, you know, where ours is who are we if we don't have our country? Who are we when we don't have our dreaming? You know, for us, if I cannot imagine a world where my grandmothers don't have a place for where their souls can rest. For everything that they have done for me, they have molded me into the person that I am today. I grew up wanting for nothing. And for me not to work my hardest to make sure, to ensure they have a place for their souls to rest, I would be doing them a disservice for the love that they had shown me and how they raised me with that love. So I guess that's why we're fighting as hard as we can. It's not just for the living, but for the dead, for their memory. It's for our ancestors. Because, you know, have you heard that when Indigenous people, they say you have to walk gently, you walk lightly. And I don't know if anyone has thought beyond why you walk lightly. You know, we walk lightly because we walk on the bones that, you know, the dust that comes from the bones of our ancestors. That dust nourishes the trees. It nourishes the soil from what helps grow those trees and the food that we eat, right? That's why we walk gently on this place, to show respect and reverence for the people who have gone before us, because they now nourish us and nourish our bodies. So if we don't fight for that, it shows a lot, I think, of who we are and how we value ourselves as people, right? Because we aren't fighting for the nourishment of our future generations and the memory of those who have gone before us. So what does also that teach our future generations? What value does that place on them? You know, we're teaching our children that they aren't important, right? If we aren't caring for our country, we're teaching them that they aren't valuable just because they are, not because of who they could become or anything other than the fact that they are. So that's why we fight, and why we fight with everything we have. Like I can tell you now, I get up and I'm exhausted. But would I stop doing this tomorrow? No. I will fight this until it's over.
It's making me think about the wonderful Combe philosopher Auntie Mary Graham, who talks about makes a case for Aboriginal peoples all across the continent being able to see a future that stretches out in front of you on your homelands for as long as the history that stretches behind you on your homelands. And yeah, that kind of gift that you're making to future generations, or the responsibility that you owe those future generations, is so it feels like something that's so important, not just for First Nations people, but for all of us located here in the really different ways that we are, to think about, you know, what it means to take seriously our responsibilities to those people who are yet to come. I guess on that, I wanted to kind of ask, because I think, you know, Gidangji for Country is, and as you've talked about so much already in the time you've given us today, is so attentive to the struggle for Gidangji futures on Gidangji country. But I think the work you're doing also really speaks to the struggle for a livable future for people everywhere, and what it would mean to refuse the kind of colonial capitalist death machine and instead, you know, look to structures that sustain life, that are based in love and care and reverence, not extraction and exploitation and profit. So I suppose for people who are listening who want to think about what, you know, the work that you've been doing, what invitations it might offer to them in their own lives on different country with different experiences, what are you, I guess, what kind of advice or suggestion would you give people as to how to approach the coming storm?
You know, there's all different kinds of ways to, you know, you can play a big part or you can play a little part. You know, you don't need to go out and start up an organization, go join it. You know, like there's Bushfire Survivors is an organization that's down south. You know, I'm assuming that a lot of people that sorry, no, I shouldn't assume. So there's a whole lot of different organizations that you can join, you know, and because a lot of these organizations are currently are chronically underfunded, right? Because they're climate change organizations and the government don't want to fund climate change organizations, right? So go and volunteer. Go and spend your time with these people, right? And it doesn't matter if it's bushfire survivors. It can be any climate change organization, right? I believe time is the most, other than your children, it's the most valuable thing a person has is time, because you cannot buy time. And if someone's giving you your time, you know that's a valuable thing, right? So go and volunteer. Volunteering is a very powerful tool, I believe. It tells the organization that they're absolutely worth your time. And what that does to people and the organisations is the morale boost is phenomenal, right? So volunteer, replant and rethink your garden. Like in my garden, I've got a whole lot of indigenous grass species that feed a lot of little birds. I make little bee nests and stuff like that. I don't clear the leaves. I put out water. Plant appropriate for your area. Seek out Indigenous organisations too in your area. Indigenous peoples don't ever want to take. We are always wanting to give, and I've seen that right with other Indigenous organisations. We are all about giving and sharing knowledge, right? Because we want you here too. We want you here with us for the next 65 years. We ain't going to get to the next 65 years without each other, and I think we all need to realise that and wake up to the fact that we all need each other to get through this, because the one common thread that we have here is that the government is making all this money from us, right? And we are the ones that are being used and abused, right? And that we need to make them remember why they are in the position that they are in, and that they are working for us, and it is an honour and a privilege to serve the community, and they aren't serving the community. They are serving these big oil and gas corporations, right? So go to protests. Be very aware of what's happening around the world. We have all this access to news and of what's happening. So dig a little bit deeper. I encourage people to dig a little bit deeper. But on top of that, I know it's really detrimental at the moment to listening to, all the horrible things that are happening around the world. So it's like, okay, so I have to allow myself some space and time to digest this information and to be looking after my mental health, right? Because that's also really important, because we need to survive this. And what's the other thing that I think that people can do? I think we all need to kind of come together and realise that we aren't each other's enemy, that we need to be kinder to each other. And I think women in particular, I think we need to be looking out for each other a bit more in this climate that we're currently in. And we need to be a bit kinder with each other, particularly women, because historically women have been the caretakers, right? And it wasn't until I think it was Descartes and Bacon who took away our power and, made caring and women's roles in society something that's not important. Mm-hmm. So we need to look at women's roles and their influence in these different roles a bit more, and start seeing women and women's ideas as assets as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this one thing that really struck me with the work that G'nangi for Country are doing is the way that you write about and practice a feminist ethics of care, and really build that into what it means to care for country, but also to put care right at the centre of your politics in a context where the state is so, as you've said, careless constantly, is so consistently unable to care, particularly for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but also for everyone who's not a source of profit or possible political benefit.
Like, you've done such an incredible job to illustrate for us the ways that just how entangled all of these fights are, and how the ability to care for country is something that is really expansive, right? Like, I'm still thinking about like how, caring for fire practices comes into conflict with like the gas wells and things like that, and how that's such a powerful example of how when Indigenous people can't care for country, the climate crisis escalates further and further, and it really is just this perfect example, I think, of how, it sort of becomes a bit of
almost a cliche of how land rights are climate action, but it's just so powerfully true in this case, and how it's also about caring for people and ancestors and the kin of the future and your non-human kin as well. And I just think I'm so grateful for what you shared with us today.
Oh no, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure, and yeah, it's I don't know how I help, but if I can help in any way, and I hope that with it, I hope I just share information, right? Because that's a form of love, right? Is sharing. So I hope that if anything, that I've demonstrated, my love for community, not just for Burrell or Gurindji people, but the community more broadly, Australia, right? And Australians, everybody, not just Australians, but, love for people, So I hope that, that's what Gurindji people are. We share, and we share our information, we share our love, because that's one of the ways in which we fight. It's a quiet, gentle fight, but it's very powerful. I speak a lot to my daughter, and I have one baby, because it terrifies me, the world that I've brought her into. And I guess that's why, I'm also doing this, because she's a young woman, and I really want her to be valued just as a person, right? Not because she is female, just because she is a person, right? And that should be enough value to be placed on a person because they're living, right? We were talking about legacy and what legacy that, a person should leave behind. And I was thinking about the legacy that my great-great-grandfather left, that I did not know him personally, but I knew he loved me. And how I knew he loved me was because he fought for his life and his daughter's life, by protecting his family. And so I think that is an important legacy, that we don't fight for our future generations to know our names, but we fight so that they know that we love them, and they know because we've left the world in a better place. I think that is the legacy that we should be aiming for.
That was the magnificent Rikki Dank from Gurindji for Country. Make sure you follow their work. You can sign up to their newsletter. You can also follow them on socials. You can also donate if you have some spare funds rattling around. They accept one-off donations and also ongoing monthly subscriptions. So if that's something in your capacity, have a think about that. This interview is huge, but one thing in particular, and particularly in terms of this broader series we've been doing, was how Rikki talked about love. She talks about and expresses and demonstrates this care, this kind of nurturing love, this big, expansive, generous love felt in all directions across time, to and from ancestors who are in and of Gurindji country, love for the people and non-human kin and places Rikki shares her world with, and the descendants both immediate and far off into the future. Love is expressed as a feeling and as an orientation to the work of struggle, of community organising, of activism and of care. This love, the love that Rikki invokes, this isn't a love about making nice. It's not a love that shies away from hard things. It's not a love that shies away from conflict. Indeed, as Rikki says in the interview, some of this love is expressed and felt through conflict. It is through their struggle, through their fight to survive and care for people and place in defiance of colonisers and colonial institutions who came to displace, dispossess and attempt to destroy them. It's through that Rikki knows her ancestors love her. It's love as a feeling and an action, love as expressed through a steadfast refusal to be dispossessed of country, a steadfast refusal to comply, to go quietly, to give up. That's this love. It's a powerful, powerful love. And this conversation, it also reminded me of some of our conversation with Nick Southwell a few weeks ago about disaster communism. He also spoke of love, and the love of people that helps drive us into and sustain us in struggle. That love, that sheer enjoyment of each other, both draws us into the work of care during times of crisis and disaster. It also helps fill our cups, it helps nourish us, so that as we fight for futures worth having, we also live lives that are worth living. Huge thanks to Rikki for her insights and her time. This has been the Radio Reversal podcast, which we've recorded at the 4ZZZ studios on unceded Yagara and Turrbal country.